The morning started like any other. The diner sat quietly at the edge of a small town road, its windows glowing softly under the early sunlight. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the low hum of conversation and the gentle clatter of plates. Regular customers sat in familiar booths, reading newspapers or sipping their first cup of the day. Behind the counter worked a woman who had owned the diner for years. She moved with calm confidence, refilling mugs, greeting customers by name, keeping the rhythm of a place that depended on routine. This diner wasn't fancy, but it was steady. People came here because they felt comfortable. That sense of comfort changed when the door opened. The bell above the entrance rang, sharp and sudden. A man stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence immediately noticeable. He wore a sleeveless leather vest over a dark shirt, patches stitched across the back and chest. His arms were covered in tattoos, his beard thick and graying, his expression neutral but alert. A Hell's Angel. The room went quiet in a way that couldn't be ignored. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A few customers looked up quickly, then looked away. Others stared a moment too long before returning their eyes to their tables. The man scanned the diner once, then chose a booth near the window. He sat down slowly, resting his forearms on the table, hands clasped together. He didn't say a word. He didn't challenge anyone's stare. He simply waited. The woman behind the counter noticed everything. She saw the way shoulders stiffened, the way a mother gently pulled her child closer, the way a man near the counter lowered his voice, as if speaking too loudly might cause trouble. She picked up a coffee pot and walked toward the biker's table. As she approached, a customer leaned toward her and whispered, "You might want to be careful." She gave a small nod but didn't stop. "Coffee?" she asked the man, her tone steady and professional. He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, please." She poured the coffee, set the mug down carefully, and placed a small plate beside it. Their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no aggression in his gaze, just weariness. "Anything else?" she asked. "That's fine," he said. She turned and walked back toward the counter. The diner remained tense. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. Every movement felt measured, as if everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing did. The Hell's Angel sat quietly, sipping his coffee. The woman continued her work. Outside, the town carried on as usual. No one knew yet that this ordinary morning was about to become something else entirely. The diner stayed quiet longer than usual. The sound of cups touching saucers seemed louder now. The scrape of a chair against the floor more noticeable. People spoke in short sentences, careful not to draw attention. Every few seconds, someone glanced toward the booth by the window. The Hell's Angel remained seated, his posture relaxed but alert. He drank his coffee slowly, eyes occasionally lifting to scan the room, then returning to the mug in his hands. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't engage anyone. Still, the tension followed him. A man at the counter leaned toward his friend and whispered, "You never know with people like that." Another customer shook her head quietly. "Why would he come here?" The woman behind the counter heard the comments, even when they weren't meant for her. She had learned long ago that silence often carried more weight than words. She kept working, refilling cups, wiping the counter, maintaining the routine. She watched the biker carefully. He wasn't drinking fast. He wasn't pacing. He didn't look like someone waiting for trouble. If anything, he looked tired. His shoulders sagged slightly, and the lines on his face suggested long hours on the road. When his cup was nearly empty, she walked back to his table. "Would you like a refill?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment. "Sure," he said. As she poured the coffee, he spoke again. "I won't be long." She met his eyes. "Take your time," she replied. The exchange was brief, but it didn't go unnoticed. A few customers watched closely, as if expecting something to happen. Nothing did. The Hell's Angel reached into his vest and pulled out a folded bill, setting it on the table beside the mug. He hadn't even finished his drink yet. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't have to pay now." "I know," he said, "just in case." The meaning was clear. He was aware of how he was seen. He had learned to prepare for assumptions, to expect judgment before anything else. The woman picked up the bill and placed it back on the table. "I'll get it when you're done," she said. For the first time, a small change crossed his face. Not a smile, more like relief. The diner remained on edge, caught between expectation and reality. Nothing had gone wrong, no raised voices, no sudden movements. And yet, everyone felt it. This wasn't over. The bell above the diner door rang again. This time, the sound carried a different weight. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence immediately noticeable. Their radios crackled softly as the door closed behind them. One was taller, broad-shouldered, his expression neutral but focused. The other scanned the room with practiced awareness. The conversation in the diner stopped. Several customers straightened in their seats. A woman near the counter lowered her voice mid-sentence. Someone at the back booth set their fork down slowly. The officers paused just long enough to take in the room. Their eyes landed on the Hell's Angel by the window. The biker noticed instantly. His hand tightened briefly around his coffee mug before relaxing again. He didn't stand. He didn't turn away. He simply lifted his gaze and watched them approach. His expression calm but guarded. The woman behind the counter saw the shift before anyone else moved. She wiped her hands on a towel and stayed where she was, watching closely. The officers walked toward the booth, stopping just short of the table. One of them nodded slightly. "Morning," he said. "Morning," the biker replied evenly. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" the officer continued. The Hell's Angel nodded once. "Go ahead." A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered, "Here we go." The officer glanced at the patches on the biker's vest. "You passing through town?" "Yes," the man said. "Just stopped for coffee." The second officer shifted his stance. "We had a call about a suspicious individual in the area." The biker's jaw tightened slightly. "I haven't done anything," he said. "We're just checking," the first officer replied. "Can we see some ID?" The man reached slowly into his vest, careful not to make any sudden movements. He placed his identification on the table, pushing it forward with 2 fingers. The officers examined it quietly. The diner felt smaller now. Every sound, every breath, seemed amplified. No one spoke. No one moved. The woman behind the counter watched the exchange, her expression composed but alert. She noticed how respectful the biker remained, how controlled his movements were, how nothing about the situation justified the tension filling the room. The officers handed the ID back. "Sit tight," one of them said. "We'll be right back." They stepped away toward the door, speaking quietly into a radio. The Hell's Angel exhaled slowly and took another sip of his coffee. The woman tightened her grip on the counter. This was the moment where things could go in any direction. And she knew it. The officers returned to the table a few moments later. Their posture was firmer now, more deliberate. One of them rested a hand lightly near his belt, not threatening, but not relaxed either. The Hell's Angel noticed the change immediately. He straightened slightly in his seat but kept his hands visible on the table. "We're getting reports of increased gang activity passing through this area," the officer said. "We need to be sure there won't be any trouble here." The biker met his gaze. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. "I'm just having coffee." The second officer glanced around the diner, then back at him. "You understand how it looks," she said. The words hung in the air. Around them, customers watched in silence. No one intervened. No one spoke up. The tension felt heavier now, pressing down on the room. The woman behind the counter took a slow breath. She stepped away from the register and walked toward the table. "He hasn't done anything wrong," she said calmly. Her voice was steady, clear enough for the room to hear. "He came in, ordered coffee, and has been sitting quietly." The officers turned to look at her. "Ma'am," one of them said, "this doesn't concern you." "It concerns my diner," she replied, "and my customers." The Hell's Angel looked up at her, surprised. He hadn't asked for help. He hadn't expected it. The woman continued, keeping her tone respectful. "We don't treat people differently here because of how they look," she said. "If there's a problem, I'll let you know. Right now, there isn't one." One officer frowned slightly. "You're aware of who he is." "I'm aware of who he's being," she said. "A paying customer who hasn't caused any trouble." The room stayed silent. After a brief pause, the officer nodded. "We'll finish our check," he said, "but we're keeping an eye on things." "That's fine," the woman replied. "So am I." The officers stepped back, speaking quietly between themselves. A few customers shifted in their seats, unsure what to think. Some looked relieved, others looked uneasy. The Hell's Angel exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. He looked at the woman. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "Yes," she replied, "I did." The officers headed toward the door. The bell rang again as they left. And just like that, the confrontation was over. But its impact was only beginning. The door closed behind the officers, and the diner remained silent. For several seconds, no one moved. The bell above the entrance stopped swinging, and the sound of the street outside faded again into the background. What had just happened lingered in the air. The woman stood by the table, her posture relaxed but alert. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't explain herself. She simply reached for the coffee pot and topped off the biker's mug. "On the house," she said. The Hell's Angel looked up at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she replied. "I want to." A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man near the counter cleared his throat. Another glanced toward the door, as if expecting the officers to return. The woman turned back toward the counter and resumed her work. Gradually, the diner began to breathe again. Conversations resumed, cautiously at first, then more naturally. Silverware clinked, coffee was poured, the routine returned, but it wasn't the same as before. People were thinking. The Hell's Angel finished his coffee and sat quietly for a moment longer. When he stood up, the movement caught the room's attention again. Several customers watched closely, unsure what to expect. He walked to the counter and placed money on it. "That's more than enough," the woman said. He shook his head. "For the coffee," he said, "and for standing up when you didn't have to." She met his eyes. "Everyone deserves to be treated like a person," she said. He nodded once. "I won't forget that." As he headed for the door, a few customers looked away. Others watched him leave with cautious curiosity. No one said anything. The bell rang as he stepped outside. The woman followed him with her eyes for a moment, then turned back to the diner. A customer approached the counter slowly. "You were brave," the woman said. The owner shrugged slightly. "I was fair." The diner returned to its usual rhythm, but the moment had left its mark. A line had been crossed, not by violence or anger, but by a simple refusal to judge. And while no one in the room realized it yet, that choice would not go unnoticed. Not by him. And not by those who rode with him. The diner felt different after he left. Not quieter, but lighter, like something heavy had been set down without anyone realizing it. The woman continued moving behind the counter, wiping surfaces, refilling cups, keeping the place running as she always had. Still, she could feel the shift. A few customers watched her more closely now. One woman near the window leaned toward her friend and whispered, "I didn't expect that." Her friend replied, "Neither did I." The owner heard them, but she didn't respond. She wasn't interested in defending her choice. To her, it hadn't been a statement. It had been a reaction, simple and immediate. About 20 minutes later, the door opened again. The bell rang softly. The Hell's Angel stepped back inside. This time, the room didn't freeze. A few heads turned, some shoulders tensed slightly, but no one stopped eating. No one stared openly. The tension from earlier had thinned. The biker approached the counter. His vest unzipped now, his posture less guarded. He rested his hands lightly on the counter, keeping his distance respectful. "I forgot something," he said. The woman looked up. "What's that?" He reached into his pocket and placed a small card on the counter. It wasn't flashy, just a plain card with a name and a phone number written on it. "You didn't have to step in," he said. "Most people wouldn't." She glanced at the card but didn't pick it up. "I didn't do it for anything in return." "I know," he replied. "That's why I wanted you to have it." She considered this for a moment, then slid the card into the drawer beneath the counter. "Thank you," she said, "but you don't owe me." He nodded. "Still," he said, "what you did matters. Where I come from, respect isn't forgotten." The two stood there briefly, neither in a rush. There was no tension now. No need to explain further. Outside, his motorcycle rumbled to life moments later, the sound fading down the road. The woman returned to her work. By midday, the diner was full again. Regulars came and went. Orders were taken. Plates were cleared. Life moved forward. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary day. But something had changed beneath the surface. A line had been drawn, not between sides, but between judgment and fairness. And though the woman didn't know it yet, that quiet moment at the counter would travel far beyond the walls of her diner. By the end of the day, the diner had mostly emptied. The lunch crowd was gone. The afternoon regulars had paid their bills and headed back to work. Only a few tables remained occupied, their conversations quiet and unhurried. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The woman moved through her closing routine with practiced ease. She wiped down counters, stacked clean plates, and refilled the sugar dispensers. The radio played softly in the background. Everything looked the same as it always did. Still, her thoughts returned to the morning. She replayed the moment the officers had walked in, the way the room had gone silent, the way she had stepped forward without thinking twice. She hadn't felt brave. She hadn't felt afraid either. She had simply spoken. A man at one of the remaining booths approached the counter as she rang him up. "You handled yourself well today," he said. She nodded politely. "I just did my job." He hesitated, then added, "Not everyone would have." After he left, the diner grew quiet again. The bell rang one last time as the door closed behind the final customer. She locked the door and turned the sign to closed. For a moment, she stood still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. The day felt finished. Whatever had happened that morning was over. At least, that's what she believed. She gathered her things and stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. The street was calm. No police cars, no motorcycles, just the familiar stillness of a small-town evening. She got into her car and drove home. That night passed without incident. The next morning, she returned early, unlocking the door and switching on the lights as she always did. The diner came back to life one appliance at a time. She brewed the first pot of coffee and glanced out the window. Something felt different. The road seemed busier than usual. A distant rumble echoed faintly through the air, too steady to be traffic. She paused, listening. The sound grew louder. She set the coffee pot down slowly, unaware that what she had assumed was the end of the story was only the quiet before something much bigger arrived. 3 days passed without anything unusual. The diner followed its normal rhythm. Breakfast rushes came and went. Regulars returned to their favorite booths. The woman worked her shifts the same way she always had, quietly, steadily, without expecting anything more from the moment that had already faded into memory. By the fourth morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The sky was just beginning to lighten as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. She turned on the lights, tied her apron, and started the first pot of coffee. The familiar routine grounded her. Whatever tension had lingered from earlier in the week had settled. Then she heard it. At first, it was distant, low and steady, like thunder far away. She paused, listening more carefully. The sound didn't fade. It grew stronger. Engines. Not one or two, many. She walked toward the front window and looked out onto the road. From the far end of the street, a line of motorcycles appeared, their headlights forming a slow-moving chain. The sound filled the air, deep and unmistakable. Her stomach tightened. The motorcycles continued forward, turning into the parking lot one by one. Chrome reflected the early light. Leather vests and helmets became visible as the bikes rolled to a stop, filling every open space. She counted without meaning to. There were dozens. Then more. Nearly 100 bikers stood together, removing helmets, adjusting jackets, speaking quietly among themselves. The Hells Angels patches were visible now, clear and undeniable. A few people across the street slowed to watch. A car stopped briefly before moving on. The town, still half awake, seemed to hold its breath. The woman stood behind the diner door, one hand resting on the counter. She didn't know why they were here. She didn't know what they wanted. But she knew one thing. They had come together. and they had come for her diner. The door opened. One of the bikers stepped inside, followed by another, then another. They didn't crowd the space. They moved calmly, respectfully, waiting their turn. The woman took a breath and stepped forward. "Good morning," she said. The man closest to the counter nodded. "Morning." Outside, more bikers waited patiently, engines now silent. Whatever this was, it wasn't chaos. It was intentional. And it was just beginning. Word spread quickly through the town. People noticed the line of motorcycles filling the parking lot. A few shop owners stepped outside to look. Drivers slowed as they passed, trying to count how many bikes were there. Some residents stood at a distance, watching in silence. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was controlled but tense. The bikers entered in small groups. Never all at once. They removed their helmets and lined up at the counter like any other customers. No one raised their voice. No one blocked the aisles. They waited their turn. The woman stood behind the counter, steady but alert. "What can I get you?" she asked the first man in line. "Breakfast," he replied. "Whatever you recommend." She nodded and wrote it down. Orders followed one after another. Coffee, eggs, pancakes, simple meals. Each biker paid in full. Some left extra cash on the counter without comment. The booths filled quickly. Conversation stayed low and respectful. There was no laughter, no shouting, no intimidation. If anything, they seemed aware of how closely they were being watched. The woman noticed something else. Many of them glanced toward the window booth where the Hell's Angel from earlier in the week had sat. A few nodded subtly in that direction, as if acknowledging a shared understanding. Finally, one man stepped forward. He was older than the others, his vest worn and faded, his expression calm. The woman recognized him immediately. It was the Hell's Angel she had defended. He removed his gloves and placed them on the counter. "I told them what you did," he said quietly. "I told them you treated me like a person." She looked at the room, then back at him. "I didn't expect this," she said. "We didn't come to make trouble," he replied. "We came to say thank you." Outside, more bikes remained parked in orderly rows. No sirens, no shouting, just presence. A few townspeople gathered near the edge of the lot, watching carefully. Some still looked nervous, others looked curious. A few began to relax as time passed without incident. Inside the diner, plates were cleared and refilled. Coffee pots emptied and were replaced. The rhythm of service took over. What had started as fear was slowly being replaced by understanding. And the town was about to see something it didn't expect. By late morning, the diner was full. Every booth was occupied. The counter seats were taken. Plates moved steadily from kitchen to table and back again. The woman worked without pause. Her movements efficient, her focus sharp. The bikers waited patiently when orders took longer than usual. No one complained. Outside, the parking lot remained lined with motorcycles, parked neatly in rows. The engines stayed off. The noise that had arrived with them had faded into quiet. Across the street, a few townspeople continued to watch. Some stood with crossed arms, uncertain. Others relaxed as time passed without incident. Nothing had gone wrong. No arguments, no damage, no fear made real. Inside the diner, the Hell's Angel stood from his booth and approached the counter once more. The room grew still. He placed a folded receipt on the counter, along with cash. Then he turned to face the others behind him. "She treated me with respect," he said. His voice was calm, steady. "That's all that happened." He looked back at the woman. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't assume. You stood up when it mattered." She met his gaze. "I just run a diner," she said. "Everyone gets the same treatment." He nodded. "That's rare." One by one, the bikers stood. Not all at once. No display. Just quiet acknowledgement. Some nodded toward the woman. Others simply paid their bills and left generous tips behind. As they exited, the bell rang again and again, marking each departure. Outside, helmets were put back on. Engines started. The sound returned briefly, then softened as the bikes pulled away in groups. Within minutes, the parking lot was empty. The diner felt different again, but this time, not tense. Lighter. A regular customer approached the counter. "I misjudged them," he admitted. The woman nodded. "People do that," she said. By afternoon, the town had already begun talking. Not about danger. About what they had seen. About what hadn't happened. The woman wiped down the counter and poured another cup of coffee. Her diner looked the same as it always had. Same booths. Same menu. Same door with a bell that rang when someone walked in. But something had changed. Not the place. The perspective. And in that small town, respect had traveled farther than fear ever could.